What's up, guys? D-Rock 1992 here. For this next video, I am going to be talking about the band Van Halen. My second favorite band of all time behind Zeppelin. So I'm following up the Zeppelin video with the Van Halen video. Van Halen's one of the best of all time. I mean, they really are an amazing rock band, in my opinion, and I'll tell you why I think so. So, Van Halen formed in 1972, I believe was the year. Yeah, 1972. But they were not originally named Van Halen. That wasn't the original name. The original name was actually Genesis. And they carried that for, I believe, a couple of years. But, I mean, they carried that for a little while, but then they discovered that Genesis was a name already being used for, because Genesis, of course, if you know about classic rock and roll, you know about Phil Collins' Genesis band, which was very successful. I'll be talking about them for sure in a later video. So they changed their name then to Mammoth. And the original people were... Actually, the original people were Alex Van Halen on drums, Eddie Van Halen, of course, is the guitarist, and Mark Stone on bass. So that was the original threesome. Eddie Van Halen, Alex Van Halen, and Mark Stone. So the story goes that David Lee Roth, they rented Eddie Van Halen, Alex Van Halen, Mark Stone, they rented a sound system from him, from David Lee Roth himself. But they wanted to save money, so they let him into the band. They let him into the band, even though he had auditioned before and he was unsuccessful at his audition. They still let him be in the band anyway. So you have Eddie Van Halen on guitar, Alex on drums, Mark Stone on bass, David Lee Roth as lead singer. And then in 1974, you replace Mark Stone. They replaced Mark Stone with Michael Anthony, a bassist and a lead vocalist from another band. So the name was changed in 1974 to Van Halen because, according to David Lee Roth, this was the name that he wanted. He wanted to have a name that had power to it, like Santana, for example. A name that seems like it has some power to it. So they renamed it Van Halen, and they played all around. It took them a little while to find success, but then they were discovered by Gene Simmons of Kiss. Kiss was pretty big around that time. In the 70s, they were just starting out, and Gene Simmons discovered the talent of this band, and I think he worked at it to make sure the band was a big success, and you can thank Gene Simmons for helping out with this. Definitely. The first album, studio album, that Van Halen released was Van Halen 1. And it is one of the best debut albums by a band of all time. Its debut on the chart was on the US 200 was number 19. A good showing, a very solid showing. And eventually this album went diamond, which means, I believe diamond means that you can go, the diamond means 10 million albums or more, I believe. 10 million, 50 million, I don't know. I don't know for sure. But yes, this album went diamond. They are one of the few bands, actually, that have 2 albums in their catalog that went diamond. One of the few. There's a few other bands as well. I will talk about the other album that went diamond later. But Van Halen 1 is just a success of an album. It is my favorite album out of the entire studio album list. It definitely is my favorite. The singles off it, You Really Got Me, which is a cover of the Kinks song from the 60s. The Kinks recorded You Really Got Me, and then Van Halen covered the song, and it's a successful cover for sure. Runnin' with the Devil, another popular Van Halen song. Ain't Talking About Love, which is one of my favorite Van Halen songs. One of my personal favorites. And then you get Eruption. Eruption is just that song that... It's an instrumental, and Eddie Van Halen performed it. This is when the world got a glimpse of how talented Eddie Van Halen is at guitar. I mean, this was a game changer right here. It really was. It was Jamie's Crying's another song. Feel Your Love Tonight, another popular song. Ice Cream Man. So, needless to say, Van Halen 1 was a great success. Excuse me, just a great success. And it really changed the game for rock and roll because this was a hard, heavy-hitting album that wasn't really seen back in that day. You have to consider as well that Van Halen 1 came out in 1978. This was around the time that disco was popular. About the time that disco was getting popular. I think it was popular beforehand. A year later, it would lose its steam, but to have a different sound, a unique sound like Van Halen, was pretty remarkable, and it was definitely good. So Van Halen 1 was released, a big success. Riding high off it, they released Van Halen 2 a year later in 1979. It gets higher on the Billboard 200. It hits number 6. However, it goes 5 times platinum, which is still a good success. It's still a good success. It has some good songs off the album. You have a few in particular. Dance the Night Away, which is a popular, you can kind of say slow tune in some ways, a slow rock kind of tune. Beautiful Girls, which is a good song. And then Somebody Get Me a Doctor, which is a big, which is a Van Halen favorite among fans for sure. But again, Van Halen 2, it reinforced the fact that Van Halen was here to stay. I mean, a lot of big bands have that first album. You have to get out a successful first album. But it is incredibly difficult for bands to duplicate their success on their debut album and take that to their second album, their sophomore effort. The sophomore jinx, kind of. It's what you see in a lot of sports and things like that. Players that don't have the success they had the first year. But Van Halen 2 proved that Van Halen was a successful rock band and that they were there to stay. Period. The third album that Van Halen recorded, 1980's Women and Children First. It also hit number 6 on the Billboard 200, and it went 3 times. It went triple platinum. Still a good number to have. Another good David Lee Roth effort. The 2 successful songs off the album were And the Cradle Will Rock, which is a good song, good Van Halen song, and Everybody Wants Some. Those are the 2 that were the most successful. And they were the 2 that drove this album for sure. Not Van Halen's best album, but still, those two songs alone made it a success. Then, in 1981, they released Fair Warning, which is actually in the David Lee Roth era of Van Halen. It's one of their least successful albums, although it did hit number 5 on the Billboard 200. It only went double platinum. It went down to double platinum. Still, however, it was it was a pretty good success. It is the slowest selling album of the David Lee Roth era, but it's still a good album. The two singles off this album, So This Is Love and Unchained, which are two wildly successful Van Halen songs, two very successful songs. Mean Street's a good song. Like I said, Unchained is a good song, and So This Is Love is a good song as well. But again, I mean, despite the lack of success as compared to the other three efforts by Van Halen, it still was a good album. Then you have a success in 1982. A year later, they come out with their fifth album, Diver Down, and that turns out to be a good success. It hits number 3 on the Billboard 200, and it jumps up to quadruple platinum. So it's a bit of a jump back, a bit of a comeback from 1981's Fair Warning. Diver Down is a very good album itself. And it's got some good singles. Pretty Woman, which is a cover of the Roy Orbison song from the 50s or 60s, I believe. A guy named Roy Orbison recorded this song originally. Dancing in the Street, which is a cover of Martha and the Vandellas, I want to say. The song was originally recorded by Martha and the Vandellas, was the name of the band who originally recorded the song. Van Halen recorded this song themselves and made it a big hit. Where Have All the Good Times Gone as well is another good Van Halen song. You've got Little Guitars, which is a good song, a good underrated, I think, Van Halen song. Where Have All the Good Times Gone is another cover of a Kinks song, actually. So yeah, I mean, this album right here was a bit of a comeback from Fair Warning, but Diver Down, a good album in its own right. It's got some good songs on it, and it was big. Then, in 1984, they hit the high of the David Lee Roth era. They hit their all-time high of the David Lee Roth era with their sixth effort, 1984. Hit number 2 on the Billboard 200. The only reason why it didn't reach number 1 was because of Thriller, I believe. Thriller was the number 1 album that year. Yes. Yeah, Thriller, Michael Jackson's Thriller, which is, I think, the best-selling album of all time. I will definitely check into that when I talk about Michael Jackson. But 1984, number 2, only was prevented from the number 1 spot by Thriller. And 1984 was the band's second Diamond album. A big success for Van Halen. But around this time, actually, just the songs off this album, probably the most popular song by Van Halen is Jump. That was a big hit. I'll Wait, another big hit. Panama, a big Van Halen hit. Hot for Teacher. MTV fans will remember that music video for Hot for Teacher, which is a very successful music video. So, I mean, those songs, and, I mean, those are the 4 big songs that really catapulted 1984 to big, big success. Certification in the U.S. is 12 times platinum. So it is a diamond album, however. And it stayed at number 2 for 5 consecutive weeks, behind Michael Jackson's Thriller. Unfortunately, though, for Van Halen, this was around the time when David Lee Roth and Eddie Van Halen especially were in kind of a rivalry. They didn't really, the band was arguing a lot, especially the tension between Eddie Van Halen and David Lee Roth. Needless to say, let me see here. Needless to say, in 1984, I believe it was. 1984, something like that. David Lee Roth left the band. He left, and you thought, let me see here. 1985, excuse me. I'll be right back.